resonance. So it's a very exciting moment in my life to maybe bring some people together. So thanks again, and thank you everybody for being here. As Sarah said, I have published 6 books, and I feel that I know how to write a book. But I wanted to begin maybe with showing you a copy of my first book that was published in 2007. And it's a project really that taught me what kind of writer I wanted to be. And it also continues to inform my poetics as a writer, but also as a visual artist. I'm just seeing people come on the talk who I haven't seen in a long time, so I'm very excited. Tarangi, you're on the talk, that's awesome. Okay, sorry, this is gonna be very distracting. Okay, so what I think I'll do is to start this talk, I'll read a little bit from this book, and then I'll show you some slides, and then I'll share with you some studio notes, some thoughts about what's going on in my studio now, and then we can have a conversation.
So this is you read. I'm sorry, if anyone wants to switch to speaker view, if you haven't already, that'd be a better experience so that Jill is on the full screen. Okay, go on, sorry.
Oh no, thank you, Sarah. Okay, so this is from Threads. It is a sovereign nation as the sky is large. I write in the haze of alleged safety, June being never night. The attachment of cell phones to the belt and new umbrellas over empty cafe tables is read as progress. Billboards are few and feature Estonian beer. Here, a blonde man without a shirt sweats for the company owned by Swedes. Wet glass appeal, his capitalism reaches toward a nation of leaning, of platform shoes on cobblestones, drunk on miniskirts. Museum labels peel away from the wall, and I strain to see as some light bulbs are out, my perspective growing dim. Watchdogs bark back Russian neighbors or the perhaps gypsies having intermarried. Excavations topped with weeds in bloom, barrels of garbage burn inappropriately. Precarious scaffolding wraps up bullet holes, and dredging the lake is necessary, while I expected something closer to Europe, tourism, or at least not that smell. My money belt is moist against my skin as I watch electrical wires in the wind, slapping against cement apartment buildings without front doors. I hand her unfamiliar money, she unfolds. Here is map, drawing a circle. Here you are now. I agree, appearing to be free of questions, though it is not clear in which direction I will go next. Between you and her tongue struggles. I understand. Thank you. Fingers blister against pages of refugees or dead or missing, as words are the only clues we have in the space between. The epistemology of touch demanding attention to presence and absence both. Underlight on a seagull's wings, a sudden change in flight path. Dear refugee, plane is faster than boat. Looking is the finding, leaving arrives. My push to the right of the page toward history. The gull perches. Needing more time to arrive, I sit on a bench between ferry terminal and city gate, imagining that my father's history is visible on my face, an uncertain expression, perhaps sadness or certain Estonian features such as hair, color, or the eyes, though in any other context, I do not believe in this. They watch. I open the Ziploc bag that holds my notebook, still in the right place, protected. Inside, I follow the network of roads pressing toward the center, a concluding city square where languages mix and trade. I read cracks in the city walls, cobblestones pulled up, grass, time, and water push edges apart under my feet, and buildings whisper against my shoulders. I doubt the accuracy of this map. On the margin, my father's handwriting. They say that this window had to be closed. They say that gardens had to be grown. They say that life has been completely rearranged to the Soviet pattern. They say that this page was torn and the Estonian book is not very old. Say, Sinul on Isa, you have a father. Temal on Tool, she has a chair. It is just as it sounds. Mul on silver, I have a friend. U on pick, the night is long. The sound of an owl or the wind. Kiryu tamamuru ukskiri, write me a letter. Try these sounds, uks avati. The door was opened. You have a father. We read. Try, say it. I have a book. How to write this book. So I'll stop there. So the question of how to write this book was really my entrance into not just text work, but also visual work. And Threads has visuals inside the book. And I just want to show them to you. They're manipulations of old Estonian books that I got when I went to Estonia to do research in the late 90s. They're also manipulated documents from family records, an autobiography that my grandfather wrote. And also they are some correspondences that I found and made photocopies, soaked them in tea and restitched them from my grandmother, who never really learned English. And also there are manipulations of maps that my father annotated for me as I was preparing for my visit to Estonia. So these visuals found a form in this book. And I would say that my poetics still remains sort of combining two different things, that on one hand, I'm interested in inquiry and narrative and storytelling, but on the other hand, I really want to treat language as material. So in my process of writing, I gather language from many sources, I rearrange, I cut, I reshuffle, trying to find the lyrical inquiry from it all. But again, the visuals have been there all along. I studied painting and sculpture at School of the Visual Arts before I became a writer. But what occurred to me is I needed studio space and I needed materials. And so writing came to me as extremely portable and not expensive. So that's what led me really to writing. And I've come to love the book as a form, that I think as a container for display and as a circulated piece of art, it has a really interesting atemporal quality. So in the last decade, and especially since my move to Abu Dhabi 7 years ago, I would say that my visual work has come forward in my studio practice and is maybe even more active than my writing work. And I think it coincides also with my kind of extended study of textiles. And so I'm gonna touch on those things for you today. And also probably come around to a discussion, and I'd love to hear your input and questions on this, is that it's possible that the same kind of method that guides my writing practice is a method that I'm also using in the studio. So that's just a little introduction. So I'd like to share with you from a PowerPoint. So now I'm going to try to do that. Technically, will it work? Let's see.
Yeah, you just click the green button on the bottom. Yeah, great.
Oh, so are you now seeing my?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll put it in presenter view. And so now you're seeing slides, right?
But we see, no, we see like it's not as large. So if you go back to PowerPoint, use slideshow. I'm
okay.
like this person ever either. Okay, yeah, great.
Oh, thank you. All right, great, Sarah. Thanks a lot. Okay, good. Okay, so I'll just show you some slides from recent work and then take you into my studio currently. My show, Poetry School in Dubai. This is an image from Poetry School. It's acrylic, watercolor, and graphite painting of a stick. And each part of the painting on paper is stamped with a number. And the stamp indicates this archive of paintings that I made while writing my most recent book, Speech. Here's one installation view that shows you some of the archive of object-based paintings, again, all stamped with a number. And again, this archive developed as I was writing Speech. Here's an installation view, a table of book objects that I made, as well as a shelf that is an archive of weavings. While I was writing Speech, I learned how to weave. The first weavings I made were very complicated, actually. The red and beige one is a complicated threading pattern because I thought initially that I wanted to learn how to weave words into fabric. So I wanted to learn threadings and different treadlings for weaving. But the further that I went in weaving, the more I was drawn to plain weave, perhaps the color of paper. That in fact, the action of weaving, throwing the shuttle back and forth, was what was really drawing me to weaving and was, in a sense, teaching me how to write speech. This is a copy of speech that is contained in a handmade book box, and there's a cutout portion of speech that holds a bronze casting of a twig. And inside this book as box, there are also two pieces of hand-woven cloth that are almost like a shroud or a covering for this, I suppose, manipulated, unwhole book. These are two bronze tablets that are castings of two passages toward the end of the book speech. And here's a kind of a grounding image for the show, just a picture of myself walking across a threshold. Walking was a very important part of writing speech. And on my walks, I would pick up objects of the environment in Abu Dhabi, bring them back to my writing studio, my painting studio, and paint their likeness without context, but again, just stamping them. A palm frond. And this makes me miss Abu Dhabi. Actually, right now I'm in Vermont. So this makes me think very much about my other home. Again, two feathers. This is a work, a sculptural work that features two plexiglass shelves, a naked light bulb, and a copy of speech that's splayed open so the reader can go underneath the sculpture close to the wall, look up, and read those pages. And so I'll read those pages for you now. At the base of society, she finds the base of her skull. Her superstructure waits for shifty instrument feedback until a father went refugee status for her to say, there, I can say anything I want. This has weight, was home. His slouching historical back, his bones as feathers, their secret fissures ask, did you know there is an organization determining how free is your country? By the way, there really is. It's like based in Germany. Check your rating fluxing. Whose country? Which you? Whose heat? Not the refugee with his pants unzipped, his pants short. Messy tourist go loud and others stealth. Messy citizen goes loud, or who makes themselves small in public space or wanders freely looking up. Say hello to the gap in her dictionary, the gap in her blouse. To cover this up and stop speaking in such an accent, she never learned his tongue. To cover this up, his too many arms, all the hands to cover up his gaping accent. What is the code for a small family on a street hovering over a baby without food, over the baby's last bottle? Who is programmed to want and want, to see and to see? She stays with the baby while he goes to find food. Their backpacks snag the screen of pity, snag donations that delete barbed wire, delete bodies in line. Who is not pictured, who is left behind, where the siege follows the edges of buildings. Not running in vectors, not the drama of open air choice. This image of a single file, her child following closely behind. Who guides them through waiting at the intersection is a body bent. Okay, and this is sort of part 2 of poetry school. The back part of the gallery is where I installed what was a teaching and performing space and a sharing space. So around the circle of chairs, a group of us met. I sent PDFs to them of things that I thought were maybe difficult poems or that asked us to decode or read in a different way. And so one afternoon we sat around in the circle and we read the work out loud and we talked together about what the poems were doing. And then on the back table, there is a box. You can see the microphone there and a PA system. But this box that doubles as a podium is a plexiglass box I designed, and it's called the Mobile Micropress. And there are actually handles inside. And it contains all of the implements you need to make a chapbook on the spot. And a chapbook is a small pamphlet-like book. So I invited collaborators, here's Isaac Sullivan, meeting with me to make work together and collaboratively, and to arrange things, rearrange, and to form a poem. Here's an artist named Igor, and I forgot his last name, and I think it's a tricky name for me to remember, so we'll call him Igor, Dubai-based artist. And we're working on this poem together, and then here they are printing out the poem, folding it up and stapling it and making it into a chapbook on the spot. Here are examples of chapbooks that were made by collaborators, and there's a third one also that's not pictured. And finally, here's a bookshelf that is installed in poetry school. And one section of the shelf are all the books that I've published to date, and then right next to them are books that continue to inspire me, books that I need to continue to make my work. And I wanted people to be able to look through that kind of library. Okay, so that's poetry school. Now I'll share some slides with you from Quilt, which was installed in a group show at NYUAD in the fall. So this was actually not in the show, but this is a quilt that informs the piece Quilt. This is a quilt top in progress. The name of this is called Moonbright, and Moonbright is the name of a textile shop in the block that I live in Abu Dhabi, the Madinat Zayed block. And here is a quilt that I actually finished that also informs this piece. And this quilt is based on, I'll just show you how I exhibit a quilt. It's on this kind of open frame, along with a picture that serves as a kind of index for this work. This is a picture from a book on Abu Dhabi modernist architecture, which developed at a different time than modernism in the West and in North America. And this is one building that I love. I think it's the Ibrahimi building on Electra Street. I pass by it every day on my way to work, and this shape of balcony informs the quilt that I made. And so this is the piece Quilt, comprised of paintings, a grid of books that I made, and also small bronze sculptures. The bronze sculptures are also informed by architecture, but they're modular, they can be moved around, and the edges of the sculpture are formed so that they're curled up, which I think softens them a little and also calls to mind the book, I think, in a book page. And here's a closer view of one of the paintings. This is acrylic and house paint on plywood. And the edges are hand painted. I didn't take them off. I like to actually hand paint edges. I'm thinking of the artist Susan Francone, who also makes geometric work, but kind of insists on the hand painted edge. And this is the grid of books that I made. This is a method of writing that I've explored in the last 5 years, where I gather a set of notebooks together. So I'm always writing and collecting things and making drawings in these books. So for one afternoon, I'll gather 5 notebooks, and very quickly I'll go through them and pull out interesting language, type it into a Word document, and then on day 2, I arrange these words, but very quickly without thinking too much. And then I go to Desco, which is like Kinko's in Abu Dhabi, and I ask them to print it up. And so this is a way of making a book kind of quickly. There's no title, there's no cover art, there's no name and author on the spine. So now moving into things that I'm working on now, or things that I'm thinking about now in my studio. So one of the things that I do is I toggle back and forth between painting the likeness of objects and working abstractly. And I've thought to myself, do I need to reconcile these two impulses? And I keep deciding not to choose one. So anyway, we could talk about that. So this is the jawbone of an opossum, and I found this on our property in Vermont, where we are now. And here's a skull of the opossum. And I brought this into my studio and also painted its likeness. And twigs, I can't stop painting twigs. I think it might be a poet's obsession with lines. I'm not sure. This is kind of large. This is like it's like a meter and a half long by a meter high. And this is another sequence of becoming familiar with. And the goal is to make about 100 of these square canvases in 1 year. And that will sort of form a lexicon, and I'll edit and choose and perhaps arrange them. And today I have them on my studio wall in some arrangement. And I'm trying not to be too precious about the arrangement. I studied graphic design for a year, and I don't want to, I want to maybe see if I can ignore some design principles and see what happens. And this is work that's actually also behind me. On this particular day, I stuck a little abstract painting in the middle of it, and I don't know why, but this is a work in progress. The goal is to make 9 pairs of these works. What I want to do here is, I'm very, very inspired by the Gee's Bend quilters of Alabama in the US, particularly Mary Lee Bendolph, whose sort of poetics of color is interesting because she works with fabric that's around her old clothes that are used. So she'll put blues together that might not have a matching tone, but that's, I think, very interesting. So I am working with 2 blues here, but they don't quite match, and I'm kind of interested in seeing that through over and over. And my process with this is that I'll stain canvas first with a very watered down acrylic, and then I'll apply the sharp lines, and then I'll make a cut, and then I'll rearrange. And so behind me today, I've decided to switch one, turning it the other direction. And my idea is that maybe these are also modular. They'll be stretched over stretcher bars. And I'm not quite sure, but I want to amass. Okay, now I think I'll just stop with, I'll sum up things with some words. So I went back to my notebook when Sarah asked me to do this, to think about, well, should I have a kind of a unified presentation? But I just had these thoughts in my studio that I'll share with you. It seems my work is maybe unified by a refusal I have to be singular with regard to genre or medium. But I could say that maybe I'm united by method, in that my work evolves over a kind of recursive act of adding things, taking away, thinking of language and image as modular and movable. And I would say also I'm driven by line, as I've said earlier, and also, honestly, flatness. I don't know that I'm interested in volume or depth. In fact, there's a line in speech that asks, please withhold your trick of depth. I don't have anything else to say about that, but it seems to be something I keep returning to. And this process of arranging and rearranging, I think, is to help get me away from self-expression. I'm not interested in autobiography per se. I am interested in storytelling. But maybe I would like for a viewer and reader to be able to stop and sort of enjoy the delicious materiality of words, of colors themselves, and not need to search for a narrative. I don't know. So how do I work? I set up a system, and here lately I've been thinking of the French abstract painters at mid-century who were working very differently than the abstract expressionists in the US, somebody like Olivier Mosset, setting up a system, a way to make 20 of the exact same paintings, and somehow that's very interesting to me. But while I'm working through this system, here comes step 2, is that I am adjusting my system. I'm adapting to what the material is telling me. And I would say that this is a particularly textilic way of working. And here I'm thinking of Tim Ingold's essay, The Textility of Making, that instead of abstract designs that are executed. When one works in a textilic way, one adjusts to what the material is telling them, and things become measured against themselves instead of an abstract measurement. And then I would say also that I enjoy forefronting process. I would like for some seams to show, and again, to bring the attention to the language or the paint itself. And so in that way, I am interested in a certain opacity. Oh, and then it says here, show work. Okay, I've done that. But I thought I would share with you, this is a nice green piece of paper, and here I'm outlining some of the people that I'm thinking about lately and looking at. On this list, Sergio Sister is an interesting Brazilian artist who I just learned about. He works in modular ways and works deeply with color. So I'm just interested in these people. And then I showed my students how to make a woven paper piece because they don't have access to a loom in this world we're in of remote education. So I took my own studio notes and this paper of influences, and I ended up weaving the two together, yeah, to make this. And I think at this point I'll stop and would love to hear any of your thoughts and questions.
Yeah, for sure. We don't have any questions as of now, but I'm sure they'll be coming in. But I have one of my own to get us started. And you say that you like to paint the likeness of something, and I picked up as well the idea of weaving the show, when you had a weaved piece in the show Poetry School that looks kind of like paper, so that also alluded to likeness. So could you talk a little bit more about that and why you're maybe attracted to that, or like work with it in your artwork and practice?
I'll try to speak about it. Yeah, thank you. It's good. Good question. It's something I'm trying to think about now. There's just something extremely pleasurable about painting the likeness of something. It's when I begin painting something, you know, hold on, let me go get that skull. I hope it's not too creepy for you, but hold on. So I'm like, here it is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I have it on my table, and I think, how can I, it seems impossible that I should render its likeness. Like, how is that possible? But I start slowly, first with pencil, and I really work on getting proportions, and then I can switch to color, and at moments where I think this is not going well, like I don't understand the shape of this thing, I keep going, and then it reveals itself to me, or I figure out the right shades. And all I can say is that maybe 2.5 hours will go by and it will feel like it's 10 minutes. So it's just extremely pleasurable. And I also think that I kind of like its containment. It's a task. When I work on abstract works, I feel that I have so many choices that it feels a little overwhelming. So maybe I actually like to constrict back to like, well, here's a likeness. Let it teach me something about looking and making. I don't know, maybe that answers your question.
It answers my question. And we have one from the audience, from Laura. She says she's curious about your experience in manipulation of metal. It seems like a distinct medium to her than paper, textile, words, weaving, or walking. She's curious to hear more about how you started working with metal and your discoveries there, and where this work might go.
Right, okay. So my partner, Johnny, works in metal. And so we were in the Netherlands for 3 summers where he was at an artist residency pouring metal sculpture. And I was happily in the pavilion house making paintings. But at a certain point, there's cross-pollination. And I'm like walking into the metal sculpture studio and I'm like, this is interesting. And so I began to think about these shapes that I was working with that were flat. And I began to think about bookmaking even. And what if I treated wax, which is a model, you know, if you make a lost wax sculpture, what if I treated this wax as if it were paper? So I cut out shapes with an X-Acto blade, but then I bent them, you know, or I used the heat to just curl an edge. So in a way, I was sort of treating the wax, which became the mold, as paper. And you know, I think sometimes because I work in textile and poetry, there's a certain, sometimes a softness to it, a lyricism. And so it felt sort of fun to just work in metal. Like, oh yeah, here's a hard, weighty metal sculpture. So that was kind of fun. Though I must say to you that I did not like the feeling of plaster on my hands. I did not like the mold making process where you have to take like chicken wire, cut it, and make this. It was like, you know, it just, oh, it was not a texture that I love. So I probably won't make a lot of metal sculpture. When I'm moving paint around, it feels silky. When I'm working with fabric, I feel that you know, we can't deny a sense of touch as artists, and those materials just feel good to me.
Thank you for sharing. I'm sorry. Also, there's like birds in the background, so please don't mind their squawks. So we have a few other questions. Another one's from Halim. He says, I'm very interested in hearing more about how Jill negotiates the experiences of others in her work. For example, the work of the artists who contributed books that they had made, the collection of interesting language that is collected into a book. The experience of my immigrants in her writing, and the skull of the possum. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. When I was growing up, the sort of foundational story in my family, and what I thought was the story that I carried into the world that was most defining, was that my father was from a strange place. And I was told by my parents that he had an accent, though I didn't realize he did. So to me, the fact that my father was an immigrant was sort of everything. I enjoyed listening to my father speak a language that he didn't teach me. We would sit in the living room and he would speak with my uncles and grandparents. And I would just listen. And I think that was teaching me a little something about poetry and the materiality of language. So I just think, you know, I'm just attuned to how we cross borders, you know, literally in families. And then I think I've written on this before, on a kind of a refugee poetics, that I think it's important to pay attention to the things that flee, the things that we lose and gain when we cross borders of many kinds. So I'm less interested in pursuing stability and a little bit more interested in the things that escape, you know, that maybe escape the definitions of literature or escape the definitions of single authorship. So that's why I wanted to invite people in, you know, to poetry school to make work with me. And when I write, you know, so this is the page in speech toward the end, that these are all texts that I was reading and taking notes on during the years that I was writing speech. So it's citational, you know, and of course this is a practice that many people use in their writing and do, and it's a kind of an ethics also of, yeah, I claim authorship, but I also know that I'm bringing in other voices. The possum skull. Well, it's just an interesting object. I don't know, I kind of like the colors of bones. Honestly, I like organic materials for the variation in colors. I have a joke that I make a lot of beige art, so and I'm drawn to any kind of bone color. I think there's just a pleasure there. There's a kind of an erotics. I mean, maybe I am also interested in death and loss, and having experienced a pretty good deal of that in the last 4 years of my life in my family. 5 years, I would say maybe something else is going on there, but I can't really ascribe all of that narrative to it either.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I mean, with my work as well, I feel like also I've been influenced by your work in the sense of like the monotones and the beiges and like being just entranced by that. So really interesting to hear that. We have another question from Azam. He says, do you ever feel like the meaning of your work changes as you work on it? Your thought process seems very fluid and flexible to me, which personally appeals to me, but wanted to hear your own thoughts and opinions on the idea from conception to completion.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Before I go on though, I want to say, Sarah, that I think you were always leaning toward beige before we worked together. And so that might have been an affinity that existed before we worked
Maybe
together.
it
So
strengthened when we started having that like mentorship mentee thing.
exactly. Okay, so this is a great question. I think when I begin a project, especially of writing, I'm not sure what the project is going to mean. And certainly when I begin painting, I try to suspend an idea of meaning. Again, I try to set up a system to answer a question. And then it's maybe somewhere midway through the system that I begin to see maybe this is turning into something beyond what I can conceptualize. I think it's really, really important for us as artists to admit that sometimes our work goes ahead of us. It's made, and we here with language, with discourse, we don't necessarily have to catch up to it. I think at a certain point in revision or thinking about display or editing, it's then that we should have conversations with others about like, what is this meaning? What is this doing, all of these works together? So I think it's somewhere halfway or 3/4 through that we should try to articulate what the work means, but I would even advocate for suppressing that as long as possible. I've seen a lot of times in school situations that I think students are pressed too quickly to say what the work means, as if they should know that first before they make the work, and I think that's deadly. I think that's a reversal. I think go to the materials, have your questions, make work, and it's even okay to say to an audience person to, I don't know, you tell me what this does. And I think that's really okay. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much. And that's also what you said, the last few sentences is something that I'm just from personal experience, like I often forget. I feel like there needs to be this larger meaning, not even just a meaning within the piece, but your whole work. And it's okay to be on that journey and to continue to reevaluate what you've created. So thank you so much for saying that.
Oh, oh, can I add something,
Yeah.
Sarah? Too, I've been really interested in reading again Statements on Art by Susan Francone and Bridget Riley, artists who are saying every decision they make is visual, and there is no meaning to the work except for it is a painting. It is meant to be experienced. And I love that. What that means is it's harder to write about such work. It's harder to speak about that work. And so that kind of truncates like what the critical community can do. Like, oh no, what's my material here? I think in the academic machine and economy, it also is difficult. If we can't write an entire paper about this work, if it only points to like pigment and shape, is it legitimate? And I'm really, really interested in thinking about that and seeing if we can allow students and each other to develop work in that way, in that vein.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even I remember maybe a year and a half ago, you said that like aesthetics is a real way of thinking. And that really changed the way that I was approaching my work. And I think like there are certain subjects that I feel aren't as like validated currently, and so to hear that from others and to hear that from you also was really like really pushed my work. So yeah, ways of thinking is really important. we have a few questions from students from NYU Abu Dhabi. So Sarah says, beautiful work, and she's wondering if you have any advice for someone who wants to dabble with writing/art but doesn't know where to start, and she is graduating, a soon-to-be college graduate.
This is Sarah who?
Al-Kadbi.
Oh, okay. So, well, I would say take Intro to Creative Writing in school, but so I would say there's lots of ways to learn to write, but one of the best ways is to look at lots and lots of poetry and set yourself up, make your own syllabus. You know, that's what I did. For years, every weekend I would go to the public library and just take out all the books of poems that I could at one time, and during that week I would study them. And of course there's so many resources also on the internet. There's poets.org. They have lovely writing prompts even on there, or talking about different poetic forms. And find out from your peers what poetry is happening in your community. You only have to ask like 3 people before you find out. Poetry is like alive and well everywhere. So that would be my advice. And write all the time. You know, it's like, fill your notebook. It doesn't have to be good, but just write.
Yeah, and then there's another question from Ariman Hosni, who asks, does every decision you make while making work, such as choosing design, color, or shape, relate to a larger meaning of the artwork, and how do you formulate the message around it?
Yeah, absolutely. My decisions do not relate to a larger meaning, even when I'm writing a book that I think is on one topic. The meaning of a lot of work is about cutting, moving, believing that materials are changeable and mutable. Like, you know, Louise Bourgeois, the artist, said, I undo, I redo. And that is a meaning in itself. Also, we have to give the work over to others for them to make meaning. So I think I'm leaning a little bit more toward like the loose side in answering this question, but I think based on the question, the way it was phrased, it's okay to play with materials and shapes and words and color and not know the meaning. In other words, you're not using green all the time because you're an environmentalist. Yes, you know, there's semiotics to everything, but you might also choose green because it's pleasurable. It's a beautiful color.
And we're gonna ask one more question and we'll end the session. But it's from Fatma Domethi. She says, thank you for your talk, Professor Maggie, but she has a question. So you say you've written the names of people you think about on that green paper that you showed in your presentation. Do you leave the paper because you would rather keep it almost private and obscure to the viewer?
No, I chose that paper because I liked the concept behind taking those names and physically interweaving them into my studio notes. And also I thought the green paper looked really good against the brown paper. And it was just what I had with my limited materials. So I took a picture so I wouldn't forget the names before I cut up the paper. But I mean, it was a fun process, and it really was more about the concept of when we work in the studio, when we work at our writing desk, we're always bringing others into our work. Other writers who've gone before us, people we've read or we've listened to. On this call right now, I hope I don't embarrass you, is a real friend and mentor of mine, I would say, is Deborah Meadows, who's an amazing poet, whose all of her books I have and have read, and I've seen her read many times. And it's such a gift to pay attention to each other's works and understand that we're really working together, even when we're in a solo studio space.
Well, yeah, that's really great. And like also the idea of just going back to the weaving, like with the paper, it seems like it's still somewhat recognizable or somewhat readable, while a piece of woven fabric, the I forgot the terms, but the warp in the weft, or what is that, right? Okay. Yeah, like that doesn't, it's not as you don't really see it as clearly. So like I like the idea of like paper versus fabric and the different outcomes of both.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's something also happening in my work lately that I do have to admit, I think I might have a little bit of like word exhaustion. Um, I think for me, it's going to be really important. My goal for the summer is to take a break from working with words. We'll see if I can do that. But, you know, like these abstract works I have behind me, I can't tell you how many times I'm like in the shower or I'm falling asleep and I'm thinking like, oh, I should put a word on that. But I'm trying to just say, what happens if I give over to another kind of language? You know, what is the fear there for me? Do I fear being, completely apolitical? Um, is that what I think abstraction is? I don't know exactly, but I'm going to try a set period of time of not working with words. So I was just kind of riffing on that idea of obfuscation, or the idea also of the warp and weft sort of being their own signifier, their own language. So like if I make 9 of these pairings, then do these double lines become something else, become a language? You know, can I develop a language in color? And I don't know. All I know is I'm really drawn to it. One of the biggest things we need to do as artists is pay attention to pleasure and what we're being pulled toward. And for me right now, it's really color.
do you think that the work behind you, if you were to put a word on it, would it change its landscape in terms of it being less abstract? Is that the okay?
I think so. I think so. And I think what I'll be asking from the viewer is another kind of attention. So when someone sees a word, they'll immediately try to take up the task of decoding, and they'll do this other kind of work, I think, to try to understand the word. And I want to see, mostly I think I just want to see if I can make strong work without words.
Yeah. And actually, we have a question that just came in, and then we'll end the session. But Fatma says, "Thank you for sharing your artistic process. It has been very insightful listening to you. You talk about setting up a system before starting a new artwork. I was just wondering if you can talk about the process of setting up a system. And I'm going to add to that and say, like, what does your definition of system mean?"
Great, good. Yes. So setting up a system means I will decide on the substrate. I'll say, oh, this should be unprimed canvas, or oh, this should be paper. I'll think of a number, like, okay, I'm going to make 20 of these, or I'll make 5. I'll even think of dimension. And especially with color, I'll try to say, let me limit my palette on this. So I'll set up, in a sense, constraints. And you know, there's a whole tradition of writing, of course, with constraints and forms in writing. You know, even something like haiku is an example of working with a constraint. So setting up a system is also another way to say setting up constraints. And for myself also this summer, I've said no words on things. So that's another system constraint. And then I have to just go forward and make the work. And at this moment, I feel I'm taking a risk even putting these things here because I don't know what I think about them yet. But that's important. Don't try to decide if it's good or bad or whatever. Keep going, try to see your system all the way through, and then look and see what you have after that.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna end this session here. For anyone that doesn't want to continue, we're gonna have a more focused conversation / dialogue with me and Jill, and then we can hear your voices and you can unmute as well. Jill has a few questions that she'd like to ask us, and so if you want to start or just like throw a question out there and anyone can jump in.
So I guess I would say thank you very much, everybody, for your questions. Those of you who are signing off, take good care. I saw some familiar names on there. Shafa is there. Just okay. So, well, I would like to hear what you think, all of you, about. Suppose you walk into a gallery and you see work by one artist, and there are paintings, let's call it, okay, it's just paintings, and there are abstract works and figurative works. What sense do you make of this? And does anybody want to talk about, I feel like this is a Dear Abby, like, dear audience, do I have to decide if I'm an abstract painter or representational? Does anybody want to riff on that?
Can you, okay, Laura.
Hi. I think when you buy the same artist in a space, it makes me feel really relieved. Because it reminds me that this pressure to make work in a particular, that you can change your constraints, and that the pressure to investigate a type of work that you can do multiples at the same time. You can work at this time in parallel with this time, in parallel with this time. You can do parallel play with mediums and ideas. And I think I have a hard time letting myself and abstraction and figurative, that's not to say that one is play and one is, I don't know how the artist is approaching it, but I have a very hard time allowing myself to do something really different or out of character. And I feel relieved when I see people, I think, giving themselves that permission, because it helps remind me that I can give myself that permission, and that multiplicity is like, okay. And then I would be very curious which one I'm more drawn to, because I love the way you are describing that, Jill, about pay attention to your pleasure and what you're drawn towards. And it's exciting when it changes. I was drawn to figurative for so long, and I'm feeling that shift, and it's really exciting. And it's been this slow shift, and now I'm paying attention to different things. And that just reminds me that I can see the same artwork at different stages of my life and feel very different things. So it reminds me of that.
Interesting. Good. I like that answer. And also that, like, let's not forget that Gerhard Richter is not the only guy who can do both things. Yeah. Huh.
Evgenia, you raised your hand if you want to unmute. Yeah.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I changed my name. Hi. What I was going to say about this was I also have to say, okay, it's so nice to see people that I haven't seen for a long time. But what Sarah said, how when you were thinking if you were to put a word on these paintings, it would then more figurative, and this struck me a lot, because I have never thought about that before, about the relationships words have to images. And I'm someone that has always worked abstract in photography as well. And then I think I was drawn to text to kind of try, perhaps put some. Tarek once told me, you should think more, Evgenia. So that's where that came about. But then when I started writing poetry, I realized that I'm writing abstract in poetry too. And I never thought that a word on on an abstract visual would make it figurative or not. So I think it's interesting to see what words do to images and how we see words themselves as images. I think that's very interesting. I think that's something what I was trying to do in my work, to see words also as visual, I would say.
Jill, just to clarify, you said abstract and figurative?
Yeah. I don't really believe that it's a binary. I mean, why do I keep, it's interesting to me, like I kind of don't believe I have to choose, but it still seems to be this thing that maybe I just can't see them in the same space, in the same plane, but maybe they don't have to be. So I don't know.
I feel with the idea of something being figurative and something being abstract, I still feel that the idea of narrative still is within both and could tie both tie both to each other, but it's not necessary for them to be in the same space physically and to have these relations between each other or connections. So that's my take on it in terms of that.
I think sometimes too, I unnecessarily feel like the weight of a certain art historical trajectory, which is like that abstraction emerged as like in one telling of it, it's like a rebellion to the image, but that's not at all my lineage for abstraction. My lineage for abstraction is like architecture and textiles. You know, it's like doesn't have anything to do actually with any kind of rebellion in picture making. So I think this is a very interesting, I appreciate your comments, and I'm like really trying to tune in. I might write a little something about this to see if I can, you kind of iron some of these thoughts out.
Do you have another question, or was that the main one?
You know, that was my main one. That is the one I'm kind of carrying into the summer. That I see ahead in my studio work is, you know, what will happen if I, you know, suppress words in the work, and what will happen if I just pay attention to desire and paint an object when I feel like it, and then move back to working with color and so on. I suppose also, I guess I just want to ask people too about, you know, I never like to talk about art and therapy or as therapy or therapeutic or cathartic, but I'm interested in a question actually that John Toriano asked. Some of you may know him from NYUAD and NYU, the painter, John Toriano. What's going on in your studios now during the context of the pandemic? Is your studio practice the same? Is it different? I don't know. I was curious to see if anybody wanted to share thoughts.
I guess I'll start, and I'll say that I've also shared this with you too, Jill. I feel that creating art and like physical art has been a bit difficult, and I've turned to words, so it's really funny that you're saying that it's going to be a no word summer. And I've been looking and observing the objects that are around me or within the space of my bedroom / office / studio, whatever that means, and starting to draw connections between words and objects, and this idea of translation, and what does that mean, and what does definition mean in terms of objects and not necessarily words, and objects as words and words as objects. So that's a way that I'm dealing with this right now. If anyone else wants to jump in.
I can say something on this. So I have a comment, but also like a clarification question. So in terms of like making art, and Laura can witness that as well, I am making art for my classes, and the topics that we've been recently juggling through after we moved online, like we did an opacity project, we did a revisit, so I was able to get some materials from NYUAD and bring them home and work with them. So to some extent I kind of maintained my art practice for that specific class. We have a deadline, we have a rubric, so I have a structured way of working, which I'm so grateful for, because I feel like if I didn't have that structure I'd be lost. um, but you mentioned something about art therapy at the beginning. So I just want to clarify, what's the question, or like what's the main concern about art and therapy, and how do you see the relation between them, so we can to think more about that.
Yeah, great. Alrima, I'm really happy that you asked me to clarify. I suppose I would say that I think it feels good for me to be in the studio moving color around. I think it feels very good for me right now to sit with these jawbones and skull and paint them. And I think that, I don't know, I really don't want to make big statements, but maybe it has to do with our immune systems, our susceptible systems, that we should really practice being open to desire and pleasure. I don't know. So is that my pandemic art statement? I don't know. But maybe therapy isn't the right word, but health, I don't like the word health either, health and healing. Maybe vital life. Certainly a virus has a life too, but I just think that art is a very potent place right now to be exercising, pleasure, I guess. Yeah, maybe that's what I'm talking about.
I have one comment related to that I'm thinking of right now, if I can share. So I mean, through social media and stuff, I've came across this idea or statement, which is, with this pandemic, we are appreciating art even more, which I don't necessarily agree with fully. I mean, people are only validating art and giving it like a high status and appreciating it because they're only sitting at their homes looking at online art. And there was a statement, I don't remember the wording exactly, but it was about like, we can validate art and we can appreciate it more with the pandemic. But a lot of the art that we see today, like from theater and film as well, a lot of it was made beforehand and was transformed to be online for people to view. So it also touches upon this question about what was accessible yesterday and what is accessible today, and what has this pandemic made accessible to us in terms of like art, for example. So for example, like in theater, I'm doing a making theater class as well, and a lot of the theater that we're watching are newly streamed online, because they want to have an audience, because they want to have feedback and people to view it. Other than that, it would have been, you would have to go to the theater to watch it, or like find trailers or something like that. So I'm just interested and curious about, like, what do situations make accessible for us, and how do they determine the amount, the extent to which we have access to art in general.
Yeah, those are good questions. I don't think we're going to know, the answers to those questions until for years, maybe. I will say that I was talking to Johnny yesterday about, I have good friends who've given poetry readings online, and I've looked at them, or they've made poetry recordings of themselves reading, and my publisher asked me to do the same thing. They're posted online, and I don't like them. I don't know. I just feel we need an audience. I like this format where we're talking and stuff. Or I know it's all squares and boxes, and I can see some of you and others I can't, but there's something live here. This idea of like recording something and putting it on, not really a big fan of it. There's a lot of deadening that happens somehow.
Can I chime in on that?
Please, Judy.
Yeah, Alrima, I think you make a really good point about the adaptation of what becomes accessible when we have no other way of getting art out there. But just my own personal experience with theater, as I remember as a kid, as a very small child, there were 2 filmed versions of very famous musicals that really, I would count those as the root of my love of theater. And as I grew old, they were Into the Woods and Peter Pan, starring Mary Martin. And you know, they were actually filmed versions of musicals, and they're definitely, absolutely, Jill, like they're not at all what the live experience is. But when I got older, it made me want to see the live version, you know, when I could and when we could afford it and actually go and see. So I guess I'm hopeful, and I think you're right, Jill, we won't really know the result of this for years to come. But what I'm hoping is that people do make their work more accessible to the world, and that will inspire the love of it and inspire people to go see the live version when they can again. Because otherwise I just feel like there's pockets of, you know, what we call culture and art that, you know, would otherwise just seem too lofty, too inaccessible, too removed from some people's lives. And if it can come into your living room, then you might feel more kinship with it and then go seek it out in a, you know, in its true format, so to speak. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's my hope. I'm always frustrated when, you know, only very wealthy people have access to art. So, yeah, there's pros and cons of all of it, certainly. We'll hope.
I think just hearing about what like ideas that may carry forward be with the pandemic and what we're have accessibility with, but the question is, will we be moving forward with these virtual art, like bring it back to art, at least virtual gallery tours or access to what is it, like the writings and just literature and all these things that were not accessible, movies as well, that weren't accessible to us in our homes, and if it will be accessible after, if this is over, inshallah it'll be over, but yeah, that's like my question with that. Will that accessibility become inaccessible anymore? So it's like being given something and then taken away from us. And if even looking at art through a screen is something that should be experienced, you know, first before you want to seek out what it is in real life, or is it vice versa? Yeah, so these are just also ideas and thoughts I'm thinking of recently.
Sarah, I hope that your talk series continues.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, that's a really amazing thing. Like I was saying to Johnny today, it's like possible that people from so many of my worlds, like Deborah Meadows is in Los Angeles and she joined us, you know, and so it like did bridge these continents, which was awesome. So I think that that's a great possibility, a really great gift going forward.
Thank you. With this, I just really wanted to highlight artists, or as much artists as I can. This is only our 3rd episode, but ways to have practices accessible. And it was really great that you also shared your studio, you know, and see what actually is going on currently and what you're working on. It's not a finished piece. I think that's really important as well, because a lot of our projects also have gone on hold with all of this, and it's just this constant idea of making and remaking and revisiting, and these are things that we're all sharing at this moment, and to see that from you as well is really great.
Thank you. And I mean, one of my teachers, Banu Kapil, really said to me, you know, that like you don't have to know why you're doing what you're doing, but if it brings you pleasure, you should pay attention to that and keep doing it. And if you're in the middle of doing something and you're like, I hate this material, or this paint is way too thick, you know, change it. Just kind of like listen to yourself. And maybe that's kind of what I'm hoping. I don't know, I'm hoping that this time we live in teaches us to listen to each other and ourselves about the things that change, like literally maybe change our body chemistries toward life. Yeah, I hope. I guess that's the one thing I have hope about. I have very little political hope for anything. So, anyway. But pleasure's political, right?
Well, on that note, I think we can end this conversation, and I just wanted to thank everyone that is still here, and also those that signed off a while ago, and also extra thank you to the NYU Abu Dhabi community for tuning in today. It's been a lot of support, and hope to see you next week. So hope everyone's having a good day wherever you are.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sarah. Everybody, good to see you.
See you, everyone.
Bye.